So here we are at the ISP Learning and Innovation Hub, a new project that's just been completed just in time for the new school year. And we're so fortunate to be chatting with an artist who's actually an inspiration for this space, Peter Siss. And this is part of the TEDx Youth that we hold every year at ISP. So we're so honored and happy to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, too. I'm very proud you have me.
And I mentioned the fact that your work is actually an inspiration for the library for what we call the Learning Hub or the Hub. And as you can see over my shoulder is an actual image from some of your work called The Labyrinth. And maybe we can start there since, as I said, the library has that influence and inspiration from you. Can you say something about the significance of the labyrinth in your work?
Well, I would say my whole life is a labyrinth, now much less than it was in the young age. So I put labyrinths in lots of my work, trying to express the idea that you never know how you get from the point A to point Z. And I was always intrigued by the story of Minotaur in the old Greek legends, reading Borges' story about seeing the labyrinth not from the outside, how you approach it, but from the inside. So I would say labyrinth is an expression for me of life in Czechoslovakia, where I grew up, trying to make my way without really knowing where I'm going and how I'm going. And so I've been using them ever since.
And speaking of your background, can you say a little bit about, as a young person, how did you become an artist and why did you become an artist?
I was born not as Peter Siss, but as Petr Sis in Brno. And it was just after the communist takeover, which I didn't know as a child. You don't know that. You just live the best you can. And it was also the time when there was no television or no internet, nothing really. There was nothing. There was even worse, it was a censorship, so nothing was getting through. There was no information. And I was left with my grandparents very often when my grandfather was a great storyteller. And I just got a pencil and piece of paper. So I was sort of doodling all kinds of things I would see around me, and because that was the way for me to get out of the reality into something very exciting. I could create my own situations. And then it became sort of like the world I could escape to. When I went to school, the school was very political in my childhood. So we had all these red flags and different statues of Lenin, Stalin, and sort of very difficult time for a child to comprehend, because it was really brainwashing. I remember my father said, "So you want to be an artist?" Because I was drawing all the time. And in Prague, there were not many choices in that time. There were not many schools. And there was a high school of arts, and then it was the academy and I said, "Yes, I want to be an artist." And I remember he said, "You know, you better think about it, because to be an artist, it's very lonely sometimes." But I was like 15 or something. I was like, lonely, I can take it. I mean, I can do anything. If you're only 15, you can do anything. And I started to be really involved in that new movement. I had a group. We played some versions of the rock and roll. I started to do posters. I started to draw my sneakers. I did, I did some records eventually for these groups in Prague. Quickly, I became the best disc jockey, or one of the best disc jockeys in Prague. I got a radio program, which was for me the proof that if something is not that important to you, you can actually succeed very quickly, because it doesn't mean very much.
So, you know, what's interesting is that you have these influences from your home, from your father, and from your own country, negative and positive, as well as all of the influences of the West, even before you left. And, you know, I'm wondering, you've done so much different kinds of work over the years. I'm wondering if you feel like there's any kind of theme that threads through your work in any way.
You know, I would say there is always this theme. I should say that it wasn't always my choice, all these different fields I was working in.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is called survival. Like when I came to New York and you have to pay excessive amount of money as a rent, you start to look how you could do something. And that's how I really became illustrator from being an animator.
Mm.
But even I had to do illustration for the book review of New York Times or for some magazine. I was always trying to talk about freedom or being free. And it might sound sort of like, one of these things is leaving home, but not leaving home as like in fairy tale when they say you go to the world. But it was more like leaving home, even if you don't feel like leaving home, just not being able to come back or something. Also, lots of these things are hard to explain to young people today, just because it seems that the Cold War or Berlin Wall, or even my daughter would say, there is no wall in the world you couldn't walk around. There must be some place where you can walk around this wall.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, no, because it's a small country. You can't imagine that. You couldn't get through that wall.
And do you feel at this point, all these years in the United States, like an outsider? Or do you feel like you have a foot in both parts of the world? Or how do you feel?
That's a very good question. But I think it's changed. I think it was easy to be sort of observer, like sort of I came from another planet before we had kids. Mm-hmm. Because then I could always say if there was a tough question about, let's say, the history of United States, I would say, it's before my time. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't here when you did that. Because New York also being all these years in downtown Manhattan in my studio, you feel sort of like you're citizen of the world because you see that was the most wonderful thing. People from all over the world.
How does it feel to you to have your art out in the world? So you're talking about the New York subway system, and I recognize your work, for example, as a New Yorker, and you have all of these books. You've had many illustrations for periodicals like the New York Times, and so your work is out there in the world in many different ways. How does that feel to you?
I feel it more with the languages when I get books in different language variations from different countries. Mm-hmm. And it surprises me how many people I can really reach.
And you did that wonderful tapestry that's now hanging in Václav Havel Airport.
Yeah, that was the best one. That was the first one. And it was really sort of tragic in the way that I did a book, The Conference of the Birds. Mm-hmm. When it's based on the poem by Al-Fattar. Mm-hmm. And when I did that book, I was thinking already about Václav Havel, because there's somebody who says, I will show you which way to go. And it doesn't mean he knows exactly, but he at least is enthusiastic enough. And I did one picture when they all fly, which was just 2 pages of the flying birds. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be multitudes of birds. Mm-hmm. And when the book came out in Czech, which was before the American edition, it was just a few months before Havel died, and I brought it to him, and his assistant. I said, for the HUPO of the Czech people. So when the news came that he has passed, it was sad. It was so sad. And somebody asked me, my newspaper Hospodářské, if I would do the cover for a special edition. And I because of the birds, I came up with this idea of the man who's made of birds. Mm-hmm. Who sort of flies above Prague. And that was the observation I had downtown New York when people fly pigeons, and then the pigeons sort of change mm-hmm. directions in the evening sun. Mm-hmm. Sometimes stay silver and sometimes stay dark. It's like these changing colors and shapes. You continue to work, and you've produced so many different kinds of works. What are you working on lately? This is book based on when my son was 15. Yesterday he was 26, so you can mm-hmm. see how long time ago that Congratulations. Was. And we walked in Prague. We went to Prague, just 2 of us, just to see Prague, so I could show him old school, old house. And just by sheer coincidence, we walked into National Museum, and there were like lots of people celebrating something and singing Živio, Živio, Živio. And they were like all sort of older, and they were cutting this big cake made of chocolate with the steam engine on it, and 100 years. And we got by coincidence into celebration of the party for Sir Nicholas Winton.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the story, and the story was with me since my childhood, but I never thought about the complete story, because when I was a little boy, I would meet lots of people who were in concentration camp or very persecuted during the war. They usually didn't speak about it. I knew people who were in England, who came from England. So I heard about the trains, but I never put it together. And the story is really about a young man, again, who's like my father when he went to Tibet. He was 28, 29. He's a young stockbroker who goes on vacation from London to Europe. He wants to go skiing with his best friend who's in Prague in some school teaching. And he just has 3 weeks of vacation. He knows, he follows politics, so he knows what's happening in Germany. The Nazis are on the rise. He knows what happened. Austria was annexed, Munich Agreement, which will cut off the Sudeten parts of Czechoslovakia. But he's going on his vacation, and his friend says, don't even bring the skis because there is like politics going on. He comes to Prague in just before Christmas of 38, and he sees Prague full of refugees from Sudeten who live in the camps in terrible conditions because it's cold and there are little kids and people are sort of, it's a panic because the Germans came, took over Sudeten. What will happen to these kids? And Nicholas Winton somehow knows this is not going to come to the good end. There's a war which will break out. And lots of people in Prague still say, no, it will be fine. The Germans, and they will never come here and we are not in danger. And there are different organizations which are trying to save the kids, but it takes a long time, lots of administration. And Nicholas Winton, because he's a efficient administrator, he just puts these lists together. All of a sudden, he's in Hotel Europa on Wenceslav Square. There are lines of people in front of his room who want to be on this list he will make of children. And he thinks because he's young and he's daring that he will arrange for trains going to England. England is the only country which has got law or permission for children under 17 who can come if they put down £50 and they will have a family which will give them residence. And Nicholas Winton, again, he doesn't think this is a big problem. I can do it, I can find the families, I can find the money to put down, they will pay me later on. I will make this, and I will find somebody who will dispatch the train. He even writes the letter, which I found the letters to President Roosevelt, and says, can you take 2,000 kids? He writes to different heads of government asking, but no country, it's not that they wouldn't want, but it has to go through Congress, it has to go through Senate. And Winton knows it's a question of few months. And he manages to get a 669 children, as we know, on 8 trains, made trip from Prague to London. He himself put everything in place, left back for London, where he worked in his office, and with his mother every afternoon, every evening, they would write letters to the Home Office to. He was very smart. He wanted smiling photographs of the kids and put them in a magazine called Posts. I don't know now if it was, yeah. And I have the pages of it, and people said, oh, we live in Shropshire and we would take a little boy. We can't, unfortunately, take a girl. And there were like different families who would agree to take these kids. And the transport would come to London, people waited in the train station, get the kid. And it's the story of these kids which got through it. I'm trying to compare it with the life of one wonderful lady who lived in the small town. Then, of course, these kids, sometimes, most of them lost all their parents. Their families vanished during the war. These kids sometimes went at age 3, 5, 11, and they came to England. They became, some of them went to Israel, some of them went to America, some of them returned back to Czechoslovakia, but they didn't know really how they got to England. Who put them on that train? How did it happen? What did the parents do? And 50 years later, because Nicholas Winton never spoke about what he did, he took it as a transaction which was finished. He couldn't do anything more. He couldn't go to these families and find out if the children are being fed. So he then drove ambulance during the war. He became again working with the banks and the retirement homes after the war. He had got married with the woman who didn't know any of this. He didn't tell anybody. He had 3 kids. And then 50 years later, in 1989, his wife was looking for something in the attic and find like a scrapbook with photographs and documents. He said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that happened before the war. You can throw it out." This was like some, and she said, "No, these are the lives of the kids." She took it to the journalist who then invite Nicholas Winton to the TV show. He doesn't suspect, he thinks it's about something else because he did lots of good things for mental hospitals and old people's home. They set him down with some people with gray hair and whatever around him. He's a very private person. Then all of a sudden this announcer starts to read his story, what happened, what I'm trying to tell you now. And he starts to be alert. And then they ask, are there any children here who, or any people who would know about this whole experience? And these people around him stand up, and they are now grown up, middle-aged or older children, and kiss him. And he obviously is like, he's a little, it's just most touching moment.
He's this amazing, humble hero who just felt he was doing the right thing and didn't feel a need to announce it to anybody once he finished his work.
I'm still fortunate that there are people who are alive who were these kids. So I hope I will connect with the whole group of wonderful people who are some of the Winton's kids.
We're proud to be associated with you as an artist here in Prague, and you know, literally having your influence behind me and in this place. And you know, one of the things I remember you talked about somewhere about the birds, and the idea of looking up and feeling this sense of infinite, that the sky's the limit. And I think that's part of the theme of this space, of this innovation hub as well, is for children to have that feeling. And at the same time, we have all these books around us, and including yours. And I just want to thank you for telling us your journey, a little bit about the journey, your journey as an artist. And we hope to have you come to the school next time you come to the Czech Republic.
Certainly looking forward to it, and thank you very much.